Shalom, shalom, everybody. It's Shalom with me, man. Up in here with another edition of the 48 Laws of Power, or another edition of a reading. And we're gonna finish up the 48 Laws of Power. Today we're gonna do Law 46, man. We only got 2 more laws left after this. Only 2 more laws left. Oh. My bad, trying to fix my Facebook and my YouTube. All right. So Law 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, a Joyce Elford book. Oh, man. So I'm trying to do this thing before I go cut this grass, because I'm going to be tired after that. We're on Law 46. Never appear too perfect. Never appear too perfect. All right. Judgment. Appearing better than others is always dangerous, but most dangerous of all is to appear to have no faults or weaknesses. Envy creates silent enemies. It is smart to occasionally display defects and admit to harmless vices in order to deflect envy and appear more human and approachable. Only gods and the dead can seem perfect with impunity. All right. Transgression of the law. Joe Orton met Kenneth Halliwell at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts in London in 1953, where both had enrolled as acting students. They soon became lovers and moved in together. They soon became lovers and moved in together. Halliwell, 25 at the time, was 7 years older than Orton and seemed the more confident of the two, but neither had much talent as actors. And after graduating, having settled down together in a dank London apartment, they decided to give up acting and collaborate as writers instead. Halliwell's inheritance was enough to keep them from having to find work for a few years. And in the beginning, he was also the driving force behind the stories and novels they wrote. He would dictate to Orton, who would type the manuscripts, occasionally interjecting his own lines and ideas. Their first efforts attracted some interest from literary agents, but it sputtered. The promise they had shown was leading nowhere. Eventually, the inheritance money ran out, and the pair had to look for work. Their collaborations was less enthusiastic and less frequent. The future looked bleak. In 1957, Orton began to write on his own, but it wasn't until 5 years later, when the lovers were jailed for 6 months for defacing dozens of library books, that he began to find his voice, perhaps not by chance. This was the first time he and Halliwell had been separated in 9 years. He came out of prison determined to express his contempt for English society in the form of theatrical farces. He and Halliwell moved back in together, but now the roles were reversed. Orton did the writing while Halliwell put in comments and ideas. In 1964, Joe Orton completed his first full-length play, Entertaining Mr. Sloane. The play made it to London's West End, where it received brilliant reviews. A great new writer had emerged from nowhere. Now success followed success at a dizzying pace. In 1966, Orton had a hit with his play Loot, and his popularity soared. Soon commissions came in from all sides, including from the Beatles, who paid Orton handsomely to write them a film script. Everything was pointing upwards. Everything except Orton's relationship with Kenneth Halliwell. The pair still lived together, but as Orton grew successful, Halliwell began to deteriorate, watching his lover become the center of attention. He suffered the humiliation of becoming a kind of personal assistant to the playwright. His role in what had once been a collaboration growing smaller and smaller. In the 1950s, he had supported Orton with his inheritance. Now Orton supported him. At a party or among friends, people would naturally gravitate toward Orton. He was charming, and his mood was almost always buoyant. Unlike the handsome Orton, Hollowell was bald and awkward. His defensiveness made people want to avoid him. With Orton's success, the couple's problems only worsened. Hollowell's moods made their life together impossible. Orton claimed to want to leave him, and had numerous affairs, but would always end up returning to his old friend and lover. Man. He tried to help Hollowell launch his career as an artist, even arranging for a gallery to show his work. But the show was a flop, and this only heightened Hollowell's sense of inferiority. In May of 1967, the pair went on a brief holiday together in Tangier, Morocco. During the trip, Orton wrote in his diary, "We sat talking of how happy we felt and how it couldn't surely last. We'd have to pay for it, or we'd be struck down from afar by disaster because we were perhaps too happy. To be young, good-looking, healthy, famous, comparatively rich, and happy is surely going against nature." Hollowell outwardly seemed as happy as Orton, inwardly, though he was seething. And 2 months later, in the early morning of August 10th, 1967, just days after helping Orton put the finishing touches to the wicked farce, What the Butler Saw, undoubtedly his masterpiece, Kenneth Hollowell bludgeoned Joe Orton to death with repeated blows of a hammer to the head. Man. He then took 21 sleeping pills and died himself, leaving behind a note that read, "If you read Orton's diary, all will be explained." Interpretation. Kenneth Hollowell had tried to cast his deterioration of mental illness, but what Joe Orton's diary revealed to him was the truth. It was envy, pure and simple, that led the heart of his sickness. The diaries with which Hollowell read on the sly recounted the couple's days as equals and their struggle for recognition. After Orton found success, the diaries began to describe Hollowell's brooding, his rude comments at parties, his growing sense of inferiority. All of this Orton narrated with a distance that bordered on contempt. The diaries made clear Hollowell's bitterness over Orton's success. Eventually, the only thing that would have satisfied him would have been for Orton to have a failure of his own, an unsuccessful play perhaps, so that they could have commensurated in their failure, as they had done years before. When the opposite happened, as Orton grew only more successful and popular, Hollowell did the only thing that would make them equals again. He made them equals in death. With Orton's murder, he became almost as famous as his friend. Posthumously. Let's see what that is. Posthumously. 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 Posterior, postern. Posthumous. 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 Published after the death of an author, including after death. Posthumously. With Orton's murder, he became almost as famous as his friend after the death, or posthumously. Joe Orton only partly understood his lover's deterioration. His attempt to help Hollowell launch a career at an art registered for what it was, charity, and guilt. Orton basically had two possible solutions to the problem. He could have downplayed his own success, displaying some faults, deflecting Holloway's envy. Or, once he realized the nature of the problem, he could have fled as if Holloway were a viper, as in fact he was a viper of envy. And day by day, it festers in a viper of envy. Once envy eats away at someone, everything you do only makes it grow. The day by day it festers inside him. Eventually, he will attack. Only only a minority can succeed at the game of life. And that minority inevitably arouses the envy of those around them. Once such happens your way. However, once success happens your way. However, the people to fear the most are those in your own circle, the friends and acquaintances you have left behind. Feelings of inferiority gnaw at them. The thought of your success only heightens their feelings of stagnation. Envy, which the philosopher Kierkegaard calls unhappy admiration, takes hold. You may not see it, but you will feel it someday, unless, that is, you learn strategies of deflection, little sacrifices to the gods of success. Either dampen your brilliance occasionally, purposefully revealing a defect, a weakness, or anxiety, or attributing some success to luck, or simply find yourself new friends. Never underestimate the power of envy. Observance of the law. The merchant class and the craft guilds, to which medieval Florence owed his prosperity, had created a republic that protected them from oppression by the nobility. Since high office could only be held for a few months, no one could gain lasting dominance. And although this meant that the political factions struggled constantly for control, the system kept out tyrants and petty dictators. The Medici family lived for several centuries under this system without making much of a mark. They had modest origins as apothecaries and were typical middle-class citizens. Not until the late 14th century, when Giovanni de' Medici made the modest fortune in banking, did they emerge as a force to be reckoned with. Upon Giovanni's death, his son Cosimo took over the family business and quickly demonstrated his talent for it. The business prospered under his control, and the Medicis emerged as one of the prominent banking families of Europe. But they had a rival in Florence. Despite the city's republican system, one family, the Albizes, had managed over the years to monopolize control of the government, forging alliances that allowed them to constantly fill important offices with their own men. Cosimo did not fight this, and in fact gave the Albizes his tacit support. At the same time, while Albizes were beginning to flaunt their power, Cosimo made point of staying in the background. Eventually, however, the Medici wealth could not be ignored, and in 1433, feeling threatened by a family, the Albizes used their government muscle to have Cosimo arrested on charges of conspiring to overthrow the republic. Some in the Albizzi faction wanted Cosimo executed. Others feared that this would spark a civil war. In the end, they exiled him from Florence. Cosimo did not fight the sentence. He left quickly. Sometimes he knew it was wiser to bide one's time and to keep a low profile. Over the next year, the Albizis began to stir up fears that they were setting up a dictatorship. Meanwhile, Cosimo, using his wealth and advantage, continued to exert influence on Florentine affairs, even from exile. A civil war broke out in the city, and in September of 1434, the Albizis were toppled from power and sent to exile. Cosimo immediately returned to Florence. his position restored, but he saw that he now faced a delicate situation. If he seemed ambitious as the Albizes had, he would stir up opposition and envy that would ultimately threaten his business. If he stayed on the sidelines, on the other hand, he would leave an opening for another faction to rise up as the Albizes did, and to punish the Medicis for their success. Cosimo solved the problem in two ways. He secretly used his wealth to buy influence among key citizens, and he placed his own alliances all cleverly enlisted from the middle classes to disguise their allegiance to him in top government positions. Those who complained of the growing political clout were taxed into submission, and their properties were brought out from under them by Cosimo's banker allies. The Republic survived in name only. Cosimo held the strings. While he worked behind the scenes to gain control, however, publicly, Cosimo presented another picture. When he walked through the streets of Florence, he dressed modestly, was attended by no more than one servant, and bowed deferentially to magistrates and elder citizens, and bowed deferentially to magistrates and elder citizens. He rode a mule instead of a horse. He never spoke out on matters of public import, even though he controlled Florence's foreign affairs for over 30 years. He gave money to charities and maintained his ties to Florence merchant class. He financed all kinds of public buildings that fed the Florentines, pride in their city. When he built a palace for himself and his family in the nearby Fiesole, he turned down an ornate design that Brunelleschi, these names, boy, Brunelleschi had drawn up for him, and instead chose a modest structure designed by Marcello, a man of humble Florentine origins. The place was a symbol of Cosimo's strategy, all simplicity on the outside, all elegance and opulence within. Cosimo finally died in 1464. After ruling for 30 years, the citizens of Florence wanted to build him a great tomb and to celebrate his memory with elaborate funeral ceremonies. But on his deathbed, he had asked to be buried without any pomp or demonstration. Some 60 years later, Machiavelli hailed Cosimo as the wisest of all princes, for he knew how extraordinary things that are seen and appear every hour make men much more envied than those that are done in deed and are covered over with decency. Shit, man. Interpretation. A close friend of Cosimo's, the bookseller Vespasiano da Bistici, once wrote of him, and whenever he wishes to achieve something, he saw to it, in order to escape envy as much as possible, that the initiative appeared to come from others and not from him. One of Cosimo's favorite expressions was, "Envy is a weed that should not be watered." Understanding the power envy has in a democratic environment, Cosimo avoided the appearance of greatness. This does not mean that greatness should be suffocated or that only a mediocre should survive, only that a game of appearances must be played. The insidious envy of the masses can actually be deflected quite easily. Appear as one of them in style and values, make alliances with those who are below you, and elevate them to positions of power to secure their support in times of need. Never flaunt your wealth, and carefully conceal the degree to which it is bought influence. Make a display of deferring to others, as if they were more powerful than you. Cosimo de' Medici perfected this game. He was the consummate con artist of appearances. No one could gauge the extent of his power. His modest exterior hid the truth. Never be so foolish as to believe that you are stirring up admiration by flaunting the qualities that rise you above others. By making others aware of their inferior position, you only stir up unhappy admiration or envy, which will gnaw away at them until they undermine you in the ways you cannot foresee. The fool dares the gods of envy by flaunting his victories. The master of power understands that the appearance of superiority over others is inconsequential next to the reality of it. Of all the disorders of the soul, envy is the only one no one confesses to. Plutarch, 46 to 120 BC. Keys to power. Keys to power. The human animal had a hard time dealing with the feelings of inferiority. In the face of superior skill, talent, and power, we are often disturbed and ill at ease. This is because most of us have an inflated sense of ourselves. And when we meet people who surpass us, they make it clear to us that we are, in fact, mediocre, or at least not as brilliant as we had thought. This disturbance in our self-image can last long without stirring up ugly emotions. At first, we feel envy. If only we had the quality or skill of the superior person, we would be happy. But envy brings us neither comfort nor any closer to equality. Nor can we admit to feeling it, for it is frowned upon socially. To show envy is to admit to feeling inferior. To close friends, we may confess our secret unrealized desires, but we will never confess to feeling envy. So it goes underground. We disguise it in many ways, like finding grounds to criticize the person who makes us feel it. He may be smarter than I, we say, but he has no morals or conscience. Or he may have more power, but this is because he cheats. If we do not slander him, perhaps we praise him excessively. Another of envy's disguises. There are several strategies for dealing with this insidious, destructive emotion of envy. First, accept the fact that there will be people who will surpass you in some way, and also the fact that you may envy them. But make that feeling a way of pushing yourself to equal or surpass them someday. Let envy turn inward and it poison your soul. Expel it outward, and it can move you to greater heights. Second, understand that as you gain power, those below you will feel envious of you. They may not show it, but it is inevitable. Do not naively accept the facet they show you. Read between the lines of their criticisms, their little sarcastic remarks, the signs of backstabbing, the excessive praise that is preparing you for a fall, the resentful look in the eye. Half the problem with envy comes when you do not recognize it until it's too late. Finally, accept that when people envy you, they will work against you insidiously. They will put obstacles in your path that you will not foresee, or that you cannot trace to their source. It is hard to defend yourself against this kind of attack. And by the time you realize that envy is at the root of the person's feelings about you, it is often too late. You exercise your false humility, your defensive actions, only exacerbate the problem. Since it is far easier to avoid creating envy in the first place than to get rid of it once it is there, you should strategize to forestall it before it grows. It is often your own actions that stir up envy, your own unawarenesses. Your own unawareness. By becoming conscious of those actions and qualities that create envy, you can take the teeth out of it before it nibbles you to death. Kierkegaard believed that there are types of people who create envy and are as guilty when it arises as those who feel it. The most obvious type we all know, The moment something good happens to them, whether by luck or design, they crow about it. In fact, they get pleasure out of making people feel inferior. This type is obvious and beyond hope. There are others, however, who stir up envy in more subtle and unconscious ways and are partly to blame for their troubles. Envy is often a problem, for example, for people with great natural talent. Sir Walter Raleigh was one of the most brilliant men at the court of Queen Elizabeth in England. He had skills as a scientist, wrote poetry still recognized as among the most beautiful writings of the time, was a proven leader of men, an enterprising entrepreneur, a great sea captain, and on top of all this was a handsome, dashing courtier who charmed his way into becoming one of the Queen's favorites. Wherever he went, however, people blocked his path. Eventually, he suffered a terrific fall from grace, leading even to prison and finally an executioner's axe. Man, they wanted that boy dead. Whew. Riley could not understand the stubborn opposition he faced from other courtiers. He did not see that he had not only made the attempt to disguise the degree of his skill and qualities, he not only made no attempt, to disguise the degree of his skills and qualities. He had imposed them one and all, making a show of his versatility, thinking it impressed people and won him friends. In fact, it made him silent enemies, people who felt inferior to him and did all they could to ruin him the moment he tripped up and made the slightest mistake. In the end, the reason he was executed was treason. But envy will use any cover to find the mask it finds to mask its destructiveness. The envy elicited by Sir Walter Raleigh is the worst kind. It was inspired by his natural talent and grace, which he felt was best displayed in its full flower. Money others can attain, power as well, but superior intelligence, good looks, charm, these are qualities no one can acquire. The naturally perfect have to work the most to disguise their brilliance, displaying a defect or two to deflect envy before it takes root. It is a common naive mistake to think you are charming people with your natural talents when in fact they're man. 2 more pages. 1, 2, 2 more pages. Come here, man, come here. Come here. Understanding the foolishness of alienating those below him, the rest did everything he could to downplay his merit and emphasizing the role of luck in his success. To put people at ease, he acted humble and differentially, as if nothing had changed. In reality, of course, he now had much more power than before. He wrote that these wise policies produced a good effect by lessening the envy which was conceived against me. Man, come here. Come here. Are you okay? Why is your shirt like that? Come on, let's fix your shirt. What's wrong? Good. What's wrong? What's wrong? What? Come on, let's sit with Daddy. All right, let's sit with Daddy. All right. To put people at ease, he acted humble and deferentially, as if nothing had changed. In reality, of course, he now had much more power than before. He wrote that these wise policies produced a great effect, a good effect by lessening the envy which was conceived against him, which is the greatest of all secrets. Follow the rest's example. Subtly emphasize how lucky you have been to make your happiness seem more attainable to other people, and the need for envy less acute. But be careful not to affect a false modesty and need for envy, envy less and the need for envy less acute. But be careful not. There you go. Good job. But be careful not to affect a false modesty that people can easily see through. This will only make them more envious. The act has to be good. Your humility and your openness to those you have left behind have to seem genuine. Any hint of insecurity, hey, stop it. I'm gonna pluck your finger. Any hint of insecurity will only make your new status more impressive. Remember, despite your elevated position, it will do you no good to alienate from former peers. When Ivan the Terrible died, Boris Godunov knew he was the only one. Yeah, Godunov. Huh? In the border. What you say? In the border. I don't know what that means. Boris Godunov knew he was the only one on the scene who could lead Russia. But if he sought the position eagerly, he would stir up envy. Hey, calm down. Calm down. All right, keep playing. Keep testing that water. He made people insist that he take the throne. George Washington used the same strategy to great effect. First, in refusing to keep the position of commander-in-chief of American army. Second, in resisting the presidency. In both cases, he made himself more popular than ever. People cannot envy the power that they themselves had given a person who does not seem to desire. According to the Elizabethan statesman, the writer Sir Francis Bacon, the wisest policy of the powerful is to create a kind of pity for themselves, as if their responsibilities were a burden and a sacrifice. How can one envy a man who has taken on a heavy load for the public interest? No, we right here. We right here over here. Or pity. A similar pity. Pity. Boy, is to hint to your good fortune. Is to hint that your good fortune will benefit those around you. To do this, you may need to open your purse strings, like Simone, a wealthy general in ancient Athens who gave lavishly in all kinds of ways to prevent people from resenting the influence he had bought in Athenian politics. Let's close this. He paid a high price to deflect their envy, but in the end, it saved him from ostracism and banishment from the city. The painter, J.M.W. Turner, devised another way of giving to deflect the envy of his fellow artists, which he recognized as his greatest obstacle to his success. Noticing that his incomparable color skill made them afraid to hang their paintings next to his in exhibitions, he realized that their fear would turn to envy and would eventually make it harder for him to find galleries to show him. On occasion, then, Turner is known to have temporarily dampened the colors in his paintings with soot to earn him the goodwill of his colleagues. That's red, the color red. The color red. That's right. Red. That's the color red. That's the color black. That's the color red. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's red. To deflect envy, Grayson, red. Come on, be quiet. Grayson recommends that the powerful display of weakness, a minor social indiscretion, a harmless vice. Give those who envy you something to feed on, distracting them from your more important sins. You gonna get up? Get up. Remember, it is a reality that matters. You may have to play games with appearances, but in the end, you will have what counts: true power. In some Arab countries, a man will avoid arousing envy by doing as Cosmo Medici. Stop doing that. Medici did by showing his wealth only on the inside of his house. Stop doing that, Bob. Stop doing that. Oh, my beard. Beware of some envy's disguises. Excessive praise is an almost sure sign that the person praising you in revenge by ignoring not easy, measly. Do not try to help or do favors for those who envy you or are condescending to them. Joe Orton's attempts to help Hollowell find a gallery for his work only intensified his lover's feelings of inferiority and envy. Once envy reveals itself for what it is, the only solution, I ask you to stop. Calm down. The only solution is often to flee the presence of the enviers. Leave them to stew in a hell of their own creation. Finally, be aware that some environments are more conducive to envy than others. The effects of envy are more serious among colleagues and peers, where there is a veneer of equality. Envy is also destructive in democratic environments, where overt displays of power are looked down upon. Be extra sensitive in such environments. The filmmaker Ingmar Bergman, who was hounded by Swedish tax authorities because he stood out in a country where standing out from a crowd is frowned on. It is almost impossible to avoid envy in such cases, and there is little that you can do. Excuse me. There is little that you can do, but accept it graciously and take none of it personally. As Thoreau once said, envy is tax, which all distinction must pay. All right. Image, the garden of weeds. You must not feed them, but they spread as you water the garden. You may not see how, but they take over, tall and ugly, preventing anything beautiful from flourishing. Before it is too late, do not water indiscriminately. Destroy the weed of envy by giving them nothing to feed on. Authority. Ooh-wee. I still gotta go cut the grass. Man, I still gotta go cut the grass. Authority. Upon occasion, reveal a harmless defect in your character. For the envious accuse the most perfectly of sinning by having no sins. They become an Argus, all eyes for finding fault with excellence. An Argus. They become an Argus. Let me see this in here. An Argus. Argus. Ooh-wee. Nope, Argus not in here. They become an Argus, all eyes for finding fault with excellence. It is their own consolation. Do not let envy burst with its own venom. Effect shall last to 1658. Man, they quote Balthazar a lot. Reversal, man. This one hurt me. This one hurt me. Reversal. The reason for being careful with the envious is that they are so indirect and will find innumerable ways to undermine you. By treading carefully around them will often only make their envy worse. They sense that you are being cautious, and it registers as yet another sign of your superiority. I can see that. That is why you must act before envy takes root. Once envy is there, however, whether through your fault or not, it is sometimes best to affect the opposite approach. Display the utmost disdain for those who envy you. Instead of hiding your perfections, make it obvious. Make every new triumph an opportunity to make the envious scorn. Make good fortune and power become their living hell. If you attain a position of impeachable power, their envy will have no effect on you. And you will have the best revenge of all. They are trapped in envy while you are free in your power. This is how Michelangelo triumphed over the venomous architect Bramante, who turned Pope Julius against Michelangelo's design for the tomb. Bramante envied Michelangelo's godlike skills, and to this one triumph, the aborted tomb project, he thought to add another by pushing the Pope to commission Michelangelo to paint the murals in the Sistine Chapel. The project would take years, during which Michelangelo would accomplish no more of his brilliant sculptures. Furthermore, Bramante considered Michelangelo not nearly as skilled in painting as in sculpture. The chapel would spoil his image as the perfect artist. Michelangelo saw the trap and wanted to turn down the commission, but he could not refuse the Pope, so he accepted it without complaint. Then, however, he used Bramante's envy to spur him to great heights, making the Sistine Chapel his most perfect work of all. Every time Bramante heard of it or saw it, he felt more oppressed by his own envy, and the sweetest and most lasting revenge you can exact on the envious. Ooh, boy, I was feeling the sleep monster. Oh, it was busting me upside my head. That was Law 46. Never appear too perfect. Appearing better than others is always dangerous, but most dangerous of all is to appear to have no faults or weaknesses. Envy creates silent enemies. It is smart to occasionally. Oh, it's grass, man. I'm feeling like game over me. Man. Law 47. That's going to be later on. Do not go past the mark you aim for in victory. Learn when to stop. Judgment. The moment of victory is often the moment of greatest peril. In the heat of victory, arrogance and overconfidence can push you past the goal you had aimed for. And by going too far, you make more enemies than you defeat. Do not allow success to go to your head. There is no substitute for strategy and careful planning. Set a goal, and when you reach it, stop. And then set another goal. And you reach that, stop. You set another goal. But that's law 47. We'll get to that later. That was law 46 for right now. Of the 48 laws of power, only 2 more laws left to go. Law 47 and law 48. And man, I might just do 2 more lives later on and read both of them today so we can get to reading Dr. Sherazad Ali's, Dr. Sherazad Ali's book tomorrow. We'll see. We'll see. But that's the 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, a Joyce Elfridge book. That bitch will kill you. I hope. I missed. I hit it. He crazy. That walk's crazy. Yeah, come on now, bitch. Stop the kill you. Sucker. Smash this bitch at me. Waltz. But anyway, yeah, that's law 48, man. Y'all just witnessed the murder of Waspinator. Yeah, shallow out till later on, till next time, man. Later on today, we'll come back with law 46, man. Thank y'all for holding it down with me. Sorry for that sleep monster was beating my behind for a minute, but shalom.